The door swung open with a creak that sounded like a warning. Cassandra Reyes pushed against the imposing black oak door, an architectural masterpiece imported from Italy, and the smell that escaped from the sealed room hit her face like a physical punch. It wasn't the smell of illness. It was the smell of neglect, of diapers unchanged for too many hours, of sheets unwashed for too many days, of windows sealed shut, refusing fresh air, of a human being, abandoned, and beneath all of that, something chemical, something medical, something that shouldn't exist in a baby's room. Cassie gripped her cracked plastic bucket from the dollar store worth $2, filled with cheap cleaning supplies, and stepped into the room she'd been told specifically, explicitly, threateningly, that she was never allowed to enter. The baby's room is strictly off-limits. Veronica Sinclair had said during the job interview 3 days ago, her cold gray eyes filled with barely disguised contempt, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, her exquisite Valentino couture dress clinging to her body like armor made of money. She has a severe neurological condition requiring a completely sterile environment. You clean everything else in this mansion: the kitchen, the bathrooms, the 12 guest bedrooms, the wine cellar, the gun vault, the conference room, the indoor pool, the private theater, everything. But you never enter the baby's room. Understood? Cassie had nodded, desperately needing this job, paying $10,000 a month to save her 19-year-old sister Maya, dying of stage 3 leukemia, who needed a $450,000 bone marrow transplant within 6 months, or she wouldn't survive. But now, standing at the entrance of the forbidden room, Cassie knew she'd been right to disobey. Because in the state-of-the-art, Swiss medical-grade crib positioned in the center of the room, lit only by faint glow filtering through heavy Hermes silk blackout curtains, blocking every ray of the Long Island afternoon sun, there was a baby. Stella Caruso, 8 months old, the only daughter and sole heir to the $400 million empire belonging to her father Ethan Caruso, the most powerful and ruthless mafia boss on the entire East Coast, who controlled 40% of all underground operations from New York to Miami, a man whose name made even federal agents speak in whispers. And Stella wasn't moving, absolutely completely still. If this story's already gripping your heart, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Now let's go back to Cassie and that motionless baby in the forbidden room. Cassie set the bucket down on the marble floor and walked toward the crib with slow, careful steps, as if she were entering a dream she feared would shatter if she moved too quickly. The room was so silent she could hear her own heartbeat pounding inside her chest, each beat like a drum, urging her forward despite every instinct screaming at her to turn back. As she drew closer to the crib, the stench grew stronger, hitting her nose like an accusation that didn't need words. Stella lay there among opulent Egyptian silk sheets that had turned yellow from not being changed in days, maybe weeks. The baby's body was so tiny Cassie felt her heart constrict. 8 months old, yet Stella looked like a 5-month-old infant. Her arms and legs so thin Cassie could see blue veins threading beneath skin that looked almost like paper. The $500 Gucci kids' pajamas were now filthy and wrinkled, the diaper swollen and clearly unchanged for far too long, and the ammonia smell of old urine burned Cassie's eyes. She reached out and touched Stella's forehead, then recoiled instantly as if she'd touched fire. The baby's skin was scorching, the fever so high Cassie could feel the heat radiating even with her hand just inches away. Stella's lips were dry and cracked, tiny fissures spreading like spiderwebs across lips that had once been pink and were now tinged purple. Rage surged in Cassie's chest, a fury she hadn't known she was capable of feeling, because this wasn't illness, this was deliberate neglect, this was a crime. She gently slid her hand beneath Stella's cheek, feeling the unnatural heat of the baby's skin, and whispered through a tight, aching throat, "Hello, baby. I'm here now. Someone's here now." And then the miracle happened. Stella's eyes flew open, not slowly, not drowsily like a child waking from sleep, but snapping open, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for days, for weeks, maybe for months. Gray-blue eyes, the same color as those of the most powerful man on the east coast of America, but there was no coldness or cruelty in them, only a desperate longing to be touched, to be seen, to be loved. Tears spilled from Cassie's eyes as she looked into that gaze, because she understood something others hadn't bothered to see, or had chosen not to see. Stella wasn't a child with cerebral palsy, as Veronica had claimed. Behind those eyes was life, awareness, a soul desperately begging to be saved. The baby couldn't move, couldn't cry loudly, couldn't do anything to call for help, but her eyes said everything. They followed every movement Cassie made with such intense focus that Cassie knew the baby understood. The baby knew someone had finally seen her, finally cared. Cassie lifted Stella from the crib and held her against her chest, feeling how impossibly light the small body was. At this age, the baby should have weighed at least 8 or 9 kilograms, but Stella couldn't have been more than 6, her ribs protruding beneath fragile skin. Her arms and legs hung limp like boneless strings, utterly slack, without a trace of strength. Yet Stella's eyes stayed open, stayed on Cassie, and in them for the first time was something that looked like hope. "I won't let anyone hurt you again," Cassie whispered, not knowing if she could keep that promise in the house of the most powerful mafia boss in America. But she knew she'd try. She'd try with her life. Cassie needed to change Stella's diaper, needed to clean the baby's body, needed to do something to ease the suffering this child was enduring. She looked around the room for supplies, and her gaze stopped on the small table beside the crib, a polished walnut table with a pristine white marble top, and what sat on it made Cassie's heart seem to miss a beat. Bottles. Dozens of medication vials lined up neatly like soldiers awaiting orders. Cassie laid Stella back into the crib as gently as possible, the baby's eyes still following her with a frightened intensity as if afraid Cassie might leave, but Cassie whispered reassurance before walking toward the table on trembling legs. She picked up the first vial and read the label. Midazolam, 5 milligrams per milliliter, intravenous or intramuscular. Cassie wasn't a doctor, but she'd worked as a nursing assistant for 2 years at Mount Sinai Hospital before having to quit to care for Maya, and she knew exactly what midazolam was. It was a powerful sedative, the kind used in operating rooms to anesthetize patients before surgery, the kind no ethical doctor would prescribe to an infant, except in the most severe medical emergencies. Cassie's hand shook as she set the midazolam down and lifted the next vial, pancuronium bromide, 2 milligrams per milliliter. This time Cassie felt the blood in her body turn to ice, because she knew this drug all too well. Pancuronium was a muscle relaxant, a drug that caused complete paralysis of the body's muscles, used in operating rooms to keep patients totally immobile during surgery, and also one of the 3 drugs used in lethal injections in the United States. Cassie dropped the vial as if it burned her skin and picked up the third one, phenobarbital, 100 milligrams, oral or injectable, a high-dose anticonvulsant, a drug that could induce prolonged deep sleep if overdosed. The fourth vial, diazepam. The fifth, lorazepam. An entire arsenal of sedatives and muscle relaxants, enough to put a full-grown adult into a coma, all sitting in the room of an 8-month-old baby. Cassie turned back to Stella, to the small motionless body lying in the crib with eyes wide open and aware. And suddenly everything made sense in the most horrifying way. She stepped closer and gently lifted the leg of Stella's pajamas, exposing the baby's frail thighs, and what she saw forced her to clamp a hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. Needle marks. Not 1, not 2, but dozens of puncture wounds along Stella's thighs, fresh red marks and healing bruises. Tiny scars already closed and darker bruising surrounding the injection sites. Someone had been injecting this baby. Not once, not occasionally, but regularly, methodically, over weeks, maybe months. Nausea rose in Cassie's throat as the truth hit her like a blow to the chest. Stella didn't have cerebral palsy. Stella didn't have a severe neurological condition that required a sterile environment. Stella was a perfectly healthy baby being deliberately poisoned with sedatives and muscle relaxants to make her appear paralyzed. Someone wanted this child to look disabled, wanted her unable to move, unable to cry, unable to do anything but lie there like a living corpse. And the only person with access to this room, the only person responsible for Stella's care, the only one who forbade anyone else from entering, was Veronica Sinclair. Cassie looked down at Stella, into the gray-blue eyes gazing up at her with absolute trust, and she whispered through a voice shaking with rage, "What did she do to you? Stella, how long has she been doing this to you?" The baby couldn't answer. Her tiny lips couldn't move to form a sound, but Stella's eyes blinked, as if trying to tell Cassie that someone finally understood, that someone finally saw the truth. Cassie knew she had to do something, had to call the police, had to tell someone. But this was the home of the most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast. What cop would dare step inside? Who would believe a poor housemaid from the South Bronx? And then she heard it, the sound that made the blood in her veins freeze. The sharp click of high heels striking marble, each step like a countdown to disaster, drawing closer and closer. The door burst open with a forceful crash that made Cassie flinch, and Veronica Sinclair filled the doorway like a storm breaking loose. She was still wearing the $35,000 Valentino dress from the morning, her platinum blonde hair flawless without a strand out of place, but her cold gray eyes were now blazing with pure fury. Her red-soled Louboutin heels worth $1,200 struck the marble floor as she stepped inside, each step like a hammer driving nails into a coffin. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Veronica's voice wasn't loud. She didn't shout, but it was so cold Cassie could feel the threat of death in every syllable. "What did I tell you? I made it very clear, very specific, that this room is off limits. Are you deaf or are you stupid?" Cassie straightened her back, every survival instinct screaming at her to bow her head, apologize, and run out immediately. But Stella's eyes were still on her from the crib, eyes full of trust and hope, and Cassie knew she couldn't leave. "The baby needs her diaper changed," Cassie said, forcing her voice to stay steady even as her heart pounded as if it would burst through her chest. "The diaper hasn't been changed for hours, maybe all day. Her skin is badly irritated. And she has a high fever. That's not your concern." Veronica moved farther into the room, her eyes narrowing into razor-sharp slits. "I manage Stella's care. I have my own nurses, my own doctors. You're just a cleaner. You have no right to be in here. No right to touch her. No right to ask questions." Cassie met Veronica's gaze, and in that instant she saw something flicker in those cold gray eyes. Not anger, but fear. Fear hidden beneath the mask of rage. She was afraid. Afraid because Cassie had entered this room, had seen what wasn't meant to be seen. "I saw the medication," Cassie said, and she watched Veronica's face pale for a split second before the reaction vanished. "Midazolam, pancuronium. Those are anesthetics and muscle relaxants used in operating rooms, not drugs for infants. And I saw the needle marks on Stella's thighs. Dozens of them." "Shut up," Veronica snarled, her calm facade shattering to reveal the beast beneath. "You know nothing. You understand nothing. Those medications were prescribed by a top pediatric neurologist to control Stella's seizures. You're just an ignorant maid from the Bronx slums. You think you understand medicine better than doctors." "I worked as a nursing assistant," Cassie replied, stepping to the crib and lifting Stella, holding the baby to her chest like a shield. "I know what pancuronium does. It causes muscle paralysis. It makes a person unable to move while fully conscious. That's why Stella can't move. Not because of cerebral palsy, but because you're poisoning her. Give her to me." Veronica took a step closer, her voice dropping into a dangerous hiss. "Now. No." The word left Cassie's mouth before she could think, a single word carrying the weight of the world. She knew she was playing with fire, knew she was defying the woman who held the power of life and death in this house, but she couldn't do anything else. Stella clung against her chest, small and warm and fragile, gray-blue eyes looking up at her with absolute trust, and Cassie would rather die than betray that look. "What did you just say?" Veronica asked, disbelief thick in her voice, as if she couldn't comprehend how a maid dared speak that word to her. "I said no." Cassie held Stella tighter. "I won't give her to you. I'm taking her out of here and bringing her to a hospital." Veronica laughed, a cold sound devoid of warmth, then pulled her phone from the pocket of her expensive dress. "Who do you think you are? You think you can walk into Ethan Caruso's house, steal his child, and walk out like nothing will happen? Do you know what happens to people who defy orders in this house?" She pressed a button on the phone and spoke with chilling calm. "Rico, come to the nursery now. We have a situation to handle." Veronica ended the call and looked at Cassie with the smile of someone who believed she'd already won. "You have 30 seconds to put the baby down and kneel to apologize to me. Maybe I'll spare you with a small lesson instead of a bullet to the head." Cassie didn't answer. She only clutched Stella tighter and backed toward the corner of the room until her spine hit the icy wall. She knew who Rico was. She'd heard the other staff whisper about him. Rico Santino, Ethan Caruso's right hand, the man known as the Blade because he preferred knives over guns when dealing with those who displeased his boss. 30 seconds passed, and Cassie heard heavy footsteps drawing closer. Not the delicate click of a woman's heels, but the solid, threatening thud of a man's boots. Rico Santino stepped into the room, and Cassie immediately understood why people called him the Blade. He stood nearly 6'3", shoulders as wide as a doorway, with a long scar running from his left temple down to his chin like a permanent reminder of the violent life he'd lived. His black eyes, deep as bottomless pits, swept the room and settled on Cassie, with the indifference of a man who'd seen too much death to care about one more. But what stole Cassie's breath wasn't the scar or those lifeless eyes. It was the 9mm Beretta resting easily in his right hand, the dark barrel aimed straight at her. "What's going on, Miss Sinclair?" Rico asked, his voice low and gravelly like stones grinding together, unhurried, unconcerned, carrying the calm of a man who knew he had complete control of the situation. "This maid barged into a restricted room," Veronica said, her voice regaining its composure now that Rico was there. "She saw things she wasn't supposed to see, and now she's holding Stella and refusing to give her back to me." Rico looked at Cassie, then at Stella in her arms, then back at Veronica, waiting for instructions. "How do you want me to handle it?" Cassie felt her knees threaten to buckle when the question was asked, as casually as if Rico were inquiring about cleaning a stain from a carpet, rather than about a human life. She stepped back again until her spine was pressed fully into the corner, with nowhere left to go. The window was to her left, but they were on the 3rd floor. Jumping with a baby in her arms would be suicide. The door was blocked by Rico, the gun in his hand perfectly steady, his finger resting on the trigger with the ease of someone who'd pulled it hundreds of times. "First take the baby from her," Veronica ordered, "then take her down to the basement. I'll decide what to do with her after I speak with Ethan." Rico nodded and began walking toward Cassie with slow, unhurried steps, like a cat leisurely approaching a mouse already trapped in the corner. Cassie clutched Stella tighter against her chest, feeling the baby's weak heartbeat flutter beside her own frantic one. She couldn't fight Rico. She knew that. He could snap her neck with one hand without ever using the gun. But she wouldn't let go of Stella. Even if it meant dying, she wouldn't let them take the baby from her arms. "Please stop," Cassie said, her voice trembling but forcing itself to hold steady. "Does Mr. Caruso know about this? Does he know this woman is poisoning his daughter?" Rico paused for a single second, something flickering in his black eyes that might have been surprise or curiosity. Then he kept moving. "That's not my concern," he said. "Ms. Sinclair gives the orders. I follow them. It's that simple." Cassie looked around in desperation for something, anything that could help her. But the room held only the expensive crib, the table lined with poison bottles, and the Hermes silk curtains sealing out the light. There was nothing she could use as a weapon. No escape, no hope. Wait. Another voice cut through the room from the doorway, deep, cold, and carrying such absolute authority that both Rico and Veronica froze in place. "Is someone going to explain to me what the hell is happening in my daughter's room?" Ethan Caruso stepped out of the hallway. Shadows and the room seemed to shrink instantly, the air growing so thick Cassie found it hard to breathe. He stood about 6'1", broad-shouldered, his body carved from solid muscle beneath a perfectly tailored black Armani suit that traced every hard line. His hair was ink black with a few strands of silver at the temples, not signs of age but marks left by years lived in darkness and violence. But what Cassie couldn't look away from were his eyes, the same gray-blue as Stella's. Yet where the baby's eyes held innocence and longing, this man's eyes held only ice and death. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to shout or threaten. Simply standing there was enough for everyone in the room to know who held the power of life and death. Rico lowered his gun immediately and stepped back, head bowed in submission. Veronica opened her mouth to speak but stopped, and for the first time since she'd entered the room, her arrogant confidence slipped away to reveal unease beneath. Ethan didn't look at them, his gray-blue gaze sweeping the room with the precision of a man accustomed to assessing situations in an instant. Taking in the disordered crib, the bottles of medication on the table, and finally settling on Cassie clutching Stella in the corner. For the first time in her life, Cassie understood what it meant to stand before a true apex predator. Not the loud brutality of Rico, not the concealed cruelty of Veronica, but the pure danger radiating from a man who knew exactly what he was capable of and had done it countless times without losing a moment of sleep. He could order her killed right here, right now, and she'd be dead before she could draw another breath. "I asked a question," Ethan said, his voice low and even like a machine, without emotion, without fluctuation. "I don't like asking twice. My love." Veronica stepped toward him, the sweet mask slipping back into place instantly, a gentle smile blooming on her lips as if nothing had happened. "I'm so glad you're home." This maid forced her way into Stella's room after I clearly forbade it. She's trying to kidnap our daughter. I had to call Rico to stop her." Ethan didn't look at Veronica, his eyes fixed on Cassie as if he were reading every thought in her head. "Who are you?" His voice wasn't directed at Veronica, but straight at Cassie. "Cassandra Reyes, sir," Cassie answered, surprised her voice still held steady. "The new maid. 3 days. And you're holding my daughter in a room you weren't permitted to enter." Ethan walked into the room, each step making no sound on the marble floor, as if he were a ghost rather than a man. He stopped about 6 feet from Cassie, close enough for her to smell Cuban cigars and expensive whiskey, close enough to see the faint scar on his chin and the veins standing out on hands that had killed before. "Give me my daughter," he said. Not a request, not an offer, but an absolute command that allowed no refusal. "And then you'll explain to me why I shouldn't let Rico do what he does best to you right here." Before Cassie could open her mouth, Veronica broke into tears. Not loud sobbing, but perfectly controlled tears sliding down her cheeks, just enough to blur the expensive mascara without ruining her makeup. The kind of tears practiced in front of a mirror thousands of times. "Ethan, my love." Veronica rushed to his side, her hand with blood-red polished nails clutching his arm in the posture of a woman seeking protection. "I'm so scared. That girl is insane." She stormed into Stella's room. She shook the baby. She was shouting about medications. "I thought she was trying to kidnap our daughter for ransom. I tried to stop her, but she refused to let Stella go." Veronica looked up at Ethan with tear-filled eyes, her lower lip trembling in a flawless display of fragility. "Thank God you came back in time. I didn't know what else to do." Cassie watched the performance with a mix of astonishment and disgust. She'd seen many liars in her life, from street kids in the Bronx to patients hiding symptoms, but she'd never seen anyone lie so naturally and convincingly. Veronica wasn't just lying, she was acting, living inside her lie. And if Cassie hadn't witnessed the truth with her own eyes, she might have believed her too. But Cassie knew the truth, and she wouldn't stay silent. "I'm not trying to kidnap anyone," Cassie said, her voice steadier than she expected. Maybe because she knew this was her only chance, Stella's only chance. "I came in here because I heard a baby crying weakly for 2 days and no one came to check. I found Stella with a high fever, lying in a filthy diaper that hadn't been changed for a very long time, malnourished and neglected." "Lies!" Veronica screamed, tears flowing harder. "She's lying, Ethan. Stella has a private nurse caring for her 24 hours a day. I personally check on her every day." "Then where's that nurse?" Cassie asked, looking straight at Ethan instead of Veronica. "I've been in this house for 3 days, and I haven't seen any nurse. No one enters this room except Miss Sinclair, and even she only came in once, just now, when she found me here." Ethan said nothing, his gray-blue eyes shifting from Cassie to Veronica and back again, unreadable. "Don't listen to her," Veronica said, desperation beginning to crack beneath the layer of tears. "She's just a maid. She knows nothing about Stella's condition, about the medications the baby needs. She's just trying to cause trouble for money." "What medications?" Ethan asked, his voice still emotionless but his eyes narrowing slightly. "Stella's neurological treatment," Veronica replied quickly. "Prescribed by doctors. You know that. You signed the paperwork." Cassie felt a spark of hope flare. "Mr. Caruso, if you truly believe this woman, you can order Rico to shoot me right now, and there's nothing I can do about it. But before you do that, I ask you for one thing. Say it. Look at your daughter yourself." Cassie stepped forward 1 step, Stella still lying quietly in her arms. "Look at how thin she is, her ribs sticking out beneath her skin. Touch her forehead and feel how high her fever is. Look at the diaper rash on her skin from neglect. And look at the medication bottles on that table. Don't listen to her, Ethan." Veronica stepped between Cassie and Ethan, her voice rising in panic. "That girl is crazy. She knows nothing. She's just an ignorant maid from the slums. Are you really going to believe her over me, Mr. Caruso?" Cassie said, her voice clear and firm, cutting through Veronica's shrill cries. Midazolam is an anesthetic used in operating rooms. Pancuronium is a muscle paralytic, one of the 3 drugs used in lethal injections in the United States. Both are sitting on the table in your daughter's room, along with dozens of needle marks on the thighs of an 8-month-old baby. If you believe those are neurological treatments, you can kill me right now. But if you have even the slightest doubt, just a little, look for yourself before you decide." The room fell into silence. Rico stood motionless like a statue, gun still in hand, eyes flicking toward Ethan for orders. Veronica opened her mouth to say more, but stopped when Ethan raised a hand for silence. Then he stepped toward Cassie, each step slow and deliberate, gray-blue eyes locked on Stella in her arms. Ethan stopped in front of Cassie, and for the first time truly looked at Stella. Really looked. Not the distracted glance of a man too consumed by his criminal empire, but the gaze of a father finally seeing his daughter after months of avoidance. "Give her to me," he said, his voice still cold, but something had shifted in his gray-blue eyes. Cassie hesitated for a second, her protective instinct urging her to hold Stella tighter. But then she understood this was the only chance. If Ethan saw the truth, he would act. If he didn't, she would die whether she held Stella or not. She gently placed the baby into Ethan's arms, and in that instant, she saw something change on the face of the most ruthless man on the east coast of America. Ethan Caruso hadn't held his daughter for 4 months. Since the day Diana died in a car crash on a mountain road in Vermont, he couldn't. Every time he looked at Stella, he saw Diana, saw his wife's eyes, her smile, and the pain was so immense he chose avoidance over confrontation. He let Veronica handle everything related to Stella, trusting that the woman who claimed to love him would care for his daughter as her own. He'd been wrong. Stella's body was so light Ethan felt as if he were holding a skeleton wrapped in fragile skin. He remembered the last time he'd held her. 4 months earlier at the hospital right after learning Diana was dead, Stella plump and healthy then, cheeks rosy, arms and legs full of life. The child in his arms now felt like a stranger. Ribs pressed visibly beneath filthy pajamas. Thin arms hanging limp without strength. Pale skin coated with a cold sheen of sweat from a raging fever. He placed his hand on Stella's forehead and felt the unnatural heat, the fever burning through his daughter's small body, while he'd been busy fighting a gang war in Queens, busy counting money and ordering deaths, busy doing everything except being a father. Then Stella opened her eyes. Gray-blue eyes identical to his, identical to Diana's, staring straight at him with an intensity he hadn't believed an 8-month-old child could possess. There was no emptiness of a brain-damaged child as Veronica had claimed. No lifelessness of cerebral palsy as the doctor Veronica hired had diagnosed. In those eyes there was life, awareness, recognition, and a silent plea from a child who had waited far too long to be seen by her father. "Papa." Stella couldn't say the word. Her tiny lips couldn't move to form sound because muscle relaxants were flowing through her veins, but her eyes were speaking, screaming, begging. "Papa, look at me. Papa, save me. Papa, I'm still here. I'm still alive. I've been waiting for you for so long." Ethan Caruso, the man who'd ordered the deaths of dozens of enemies without his hand ever shaking, the man who'd built a $400 million criminal empire on blood and bones, the man even the FBI treated with caution, felt something shatter in his chest as he looked into his daughter's eyes. The ice he'd built around his heart since Diana's death, the ice that allowed him to keep living and ruling his empire without losing his mind to grief, began to crack and break apart piece by piece. He remembered Diana dying alone in an overturned car at the bottom of a 300-foot ravine. He remembered swearing he'd protect Stella at all costs. He remembered how catastrophically he'd failed. His daughter had been starved, neglected, poisoned inside his own home, right under his nose, by the woman he'd trusted. Ethan turned his head toward Veronica, and in his gray-blue eyes there was no longer cold detachment. There was only fire, the fire of a rage igniting that nothing could extinguish. "Rico," Ethan said, a single word carrying the weight of a death sentence. "Hold her." Rico didn't need to be told twice. In a movement as fast as lightning, he seized Veronica's arm and twisted it behind her back. The gun that had been aimed at Cassie moments earlier now holstered. Unnecessary now that the target had changed. "Ethan, no, you've misunderstood," Veronica screamed, the mask of practiced tears collapsing completely to reveal real panic beneath. "I can explain. Those medications were prescribed by doctors. I have paperwork. I have certifications. That maid doesn't understand anything. She's trying to turn you against me." Ethan walked toward Veronica, Stella still cradled in his arms, and with every step he took forward, Veronica tried to retreat, but Rico held her firmly in place. He stopped right in front of the woman he'd once shared a bed with, the woman he'd believed would help him survive the loss of Diana. And when he spoke, his voice was colder than a New York winter. "How stupid do you think I am? Pancuronium, Veronica. I've used that drug to keep people paralyzed while I questioned them. I know exactly what it does. And you injected it into my daughter." "No, I swear, I never hurt Stella," Veronica cried. this time truly crying, tears and mucus streaking her expensive makeup and destroying the perfect image she'd so carefully constructed. I love her like my own child. Everything I did was for her good. For your good. Please, Ethan. Please believe me. Cassie stood frozen, barely daring to breathe, watching the justice of the underworld unfold before her eyes. There were no lawyers, no courtrooms, no juries. There was only Ethan Caruso and his absolute judgment. "Rico, take her to the basement," Ethan said, turning his back on Veronica as if she no longer existed. "Call Tommy and Sal. I'll come down after I take care of Stella." "No, Ethan, no!" Veronica screamed as Rico began dragging her from the room, her voice shifting from pleading to hysteria. "You can't do this to me. I did everything for you. I helped you get rid of that bitch, Diana." Cassie saw Ethan freeze, every muscle in his body tightening like a wire about to snap. He turned slowly, his gray-blue eyes now black as an abyss. "What did you just say?" Veronica realized she'd said too much, her eyes wide with horror, but it was too late to take the words back. "I didn't mean to. The car crash that killed Diana." Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping into a whisper more dangerous than any shout. "That wasn't an accident, was it?" Veronica said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. "Take her away," Ethan said to Rico, his voice now completely devoid of emotion, cold as death. "And make sure she stays alive long enough for me to have time to get the truth out of her." Veronica screamed and cursed as Rico dragged her out, her threats and insults echoing down the hallway until the elevator doors closed and swallowed everything into silence. The room became suffocatingly quiet. Ethan stood there with his back to Cassie, his shoulders trembling slightly as if he were restraining a fury that wanted to destroy everything around him. Stella remained in his arms, gray-blue eyes gazing up at her father with an uncanny calm, as if she knew she was finally safe. A minute passed, maybe 2. Cassie didn't dare count. Then Ethan turned to look at her, and in the eyes of the most powerful mafia boss on the east coast of America, Cassie saw something she never expected: gratitude. "You saved my daughter," Ethan said, his voice rough as if the words had to force their way through barbed wire in his throat. Cassie didn't know how to respond, so she told the truth. "I just opened a door someone told me I wasn't allowed to open." Dr. Harrison Wells arrived at the Caruso estate within 45 minutes of Ethan's call, carrying his leather medical bag and the expression of a man accustomed to being summoned at strange hours to serve the most powerful family on the East Coast. He had been the Caruso family's private physician for 15 years, had stitched bullet wounds for Ethan, had witnessed Diana give birth to Stella, had signed Diana's death certificate without asking too many questions, and tonight he would be forced to face the truth about what had been done to the child he believed he was helping. Ethan placed Stella on the bed in the main living room, a space spanning 200 square meters with 5-meter ceilings and a massive, glittering crystal chandelier, and Dr. Wells began his examination. Cassie stood in the corner, unsure whether she should be there, but every time she thought about leaving, Stella's eyes searched for her, gray-blue eyes filled with fear, as if the baby believed that if Cassie walked away, everything would return to how it was before, so she stayed. Dr. Wells drew blood from Stella's tiny arm, and the baby didn't cry, didn't react, her body lying motionless like a cloth doll as the needle pierced her skin. That was what made Cassie want to cry the most, not the baby's silence, but the resignation in it, as if Stella was so accustomed to being stuck with needles that she no longer responded. Dr. Wells carried the blood sample to the portable testing machine he'd brought, and for the next 30 minutes the room sank into a suffocating tense silence. Ethan stood by the window, staring out at the darkness of Long Island Sound, his back rigid like stone. Cassie sat on a chair beside Stella's bed, her hand wrapped around the baby's tiny fingers, feeling Stella trying to squeeze back even though her muscles had no strength. "The results are in," Dr. Wells said, his voice trembling slightly as he read the numbers on the screen. "Mr. Caruso, I need you to stay calm when you hear this." "Say it," Ethan replied without turning around, his voice flat like the surface of a lake before a storm. "The midazolam level in Stella's blood is 6 times higher than what's considered safe for an infant. The pancuronium level is 4 times higher. Phenobarbital is 3 times higher. Her kidneys and liver are working overtime to clear these drugs from her system." If this had continued another week or two, Dr. Wells stopped, swallowing hard. She could have gone into multiple organ failure. Cassie heard Ethan's fist slam into the window frame, the sound of oak cracking echoing through the quiet night. But he didn't speak. Dr. Wells continued, his voice dropping as if he were trying to shrink beneath the fury building in the room. I need you to understand. Mr. Caruso, I didn't know about this. Miss Sinclair told me Stella was being treated by specialists from Mount Sinai, that I didn't need to intervene. I believed her. I'm sorry. Ethan still didn't turn around, but Cassie could see his shoulders shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of restraining a rage that wanted to destroy everything in sight. Can she recover? He finally asked, his voice hoarse. If we detox her properly, slowly taper the medications over 4 to 6 weeks, provide proper nutrition and physical therapy to rebuild her muscles. Dr. Wells looked at Stella with guilt and hope mingling in his eyes. Yes, she can make a full recovery. There's no permanent brain damage. She's still very young. Her body has an incredible capacity to heal. If we act now, Stella can develop normally like any other child. Ethan turned around, and for the first time Cassie saw tears in the gray-blue eyes of the most powerful Mafia boss in America. He didn't let them fall. Ethan Caruso would never cry in front of others, but they were there, shimmering beneath the chandelier like diamonds made of pain. Do whatever needs to be done, he told Dr. Wells. Call any specialist you need. Money isn't an issue. I want my daughter to be well. Dr. Wells nodded and began making calls, and the longest night in the Caruso estate officially began. Cassie didn't leave Stella's side that night, and she didn't know that Ethan didn't leave the doorway either, standing in the shadows, guarding, protecting, and for the first time in 4 months, truly being a father. 1 week passed like a dream Cassie wasn't sure was real or imagined. She was still at the Caruso estate, no longer as a cleaning maid like she'd been at first, but as the only person Stella would allow to touch her besides the doctors. Whenever anyone else tried to hold the baby, Stella would wail in a thin kitten-like cry, gray-blue eyes searching frantically for Cassie with the panic of a child who'd lost trust in everyone except one person. So Cassie stayed, sleeping on the couch in Stella's room, waking every 3 hours to feed her a special nutrient-rich formula, soothing her through the tremors as her small body endured the painful process of withdrawal. Ethan appeared in the doorway every night, standing there in silence, watching Cassie care for his daughter with eyes that gave nothing away, then disappearing back into the shadows before Cassie could say a word. On the 7th day, after Cassie had just put Stella down following a midnight feeding, she stepped out into the hallway and found Ethan standing there, as if he'd been waiting for her. Come to my office, he said. Not a request, but not an order either. Something in between. I need to talk to you. Cassie followed Ethan down the long hallway lined with Persian carpets, worth $50,000 each, past original paintings by master artists that could buy entire blocks in the Bronx where she'd grown up, and finally stopped before the walnut door leading into the office of the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast. The room was dim, lit only by the fire in the fireplace, and a Tiffany desk lamp worth $20,000 on the desk. The air smelled of Cuban cigars, expensive whiskey, and aged leather from the old books lining the shelves. Ethan gestured to the leather chair in front of the desk, and Cassie sat, feeling as if she were before a judge awaiting a verdict. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a 50-year-old Macallan bottle, worth $30,000, and set one in front of Cassie without asking if she drank. I've looked into you, Ethan said, sitting in the chair across from her instead of behind the desk like a boss facing an employee. Cassandra Maria Reyes, 27 years old, born in Puerto Rico, moved to the Bronx at 10. Parents killed in a grocery store robbery when you were 12. You raised your sister Maya from then on. Worked as a nursing assistant at Mount Sinai for 2 years. Quit to care for your sister during cancer treatment. 3 house cleaning jobs at once for the past 2 years. Still $200,000 short for Maya's bone marrow transplant, and she has 5 months left. Cassie wasn't surprised he knew all this. She was surprised he'd cared enough to find out. What do you want from me, Mr. Caruso? I want you to stay, Ethan said plainly, without detours. Be Stella's official nanny. Salary of $50,000 a month. A private room in the estate next to Stella's. Top-tier health insurance for you and Maya. And, he paused for a second, I'll cover the full cost of your sister's treatment and transplant. Immediately. Non-refundable. Cassie felt as if she'd been punched in the chest, her breath catching in her throat. $200,000. The sum she'd fought for over 2 years, the number she cried over every night not knowing how to reach, was being placed before her as if it were pocket change. She opened her mouth, ready to thank him, ready to accept instantly for Maya, for her sister who was slowly dying in a hospital bed. Then she stopped. "No," she said, and she saw Ethan raise an eyebrow in genuine surprise. "You're refusing. I don't need charity," Cassie said. Surprised, her voice remained steady. "I've taken care of myself and Maya for 15 years. I'll find another way." Ethan studied her for a long moment, gray-blue eyes unreadable. "This isn't charity," he said. "It's a job. You work, I pay you. What's the problem?" "The problem is I don't want to live in the house of a man." Cassie stopped, unsure how to phrase it. "A man who ordered someone killed right in front of me." "You mean Veronica?" Ethan said, his voice dropping an octave. "She will never be a threat to this family again. Do you want to know the details of her fate?" "No," Cassie replied quickly. "I don't want to know. And that's exactly the problem. I don't belong to this world, Mr. Caruso. I'm just a girl from the Bronx." Ethan was silent for a long moment, then stood and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. "Do you know why I let Veronica take care of Stella?" he asked, his voice lowering. "Because I couldn't look at my daughter. Every time I saw Stella, I saw Diana. I saw my wife dying alone in a crushed car at the bottom of a 300-foot ravine. I didn't know Veronica caused that crash. I didn't know she was poisoning my daughter. I failed as a father in a way that can't be forgiven." He turned back to Cassie. "But you didn't fail. You did what I couldn't. You opened that door. You saved Stella. So this isn't charity, Cassandra. This is me asking you to help me protect the only thing left in my life worth protecting." Cassie looked down at the glass of whiskey in her hand, thinking of Maya lying in a hospital bed with tubes running into her body, thinking of Stella sleeping just rooms away with eyes that searched for her every time she woke. She thought of her life, of the choices that had brought her here, of the doors she'd opened and the ones she'd closed. "I'm not doing this for the money," she finally said, lifting her gaze to Ethan. "I'm doing this for Stella. For a baby who looks at me like I'm the only person in the world who doesn't hurt her, and I can't abandon that look." Ethan nodded, and Cassie could have sworn she saw something like respect flicker in his icy gray-blue eyes. "Then we have an agreement." The next 6 weeks were the most painful 6 weeks Cassie had ever witnessed in her life, and she had seen more suffering than most. Stella's withdrawal didn't unfold gently like in movies. There was no miraculous moment when the baby suddenly woke up healthy and whole. Instead, there were endless nights when Stella trembled without stopping, her tiny body convulsing as if thousands of ants were crawling beneath her skin. Gray-blue eyes wide with a terror she couldn't put into words. There were fevers that came and went without warning, forcing Cassie to stay awake all night, pressing cool cloths to the baby's forehead, singing Spanish lullabies her mother had once sung to her before she was killed in that robbery years ago. There were moments when Stella vomited everything Cassie had just fed her, her body rejecting everything except the poisons that had become part of her system for months. Dr. Wells came every day, sometimes twice a day, checking vitals, adjusting the tapering doses, and every time he told Cassie she was doing well, that Stella was progressing, that patience was all it would take. But patience was a luxury when she had to watch an 8-month-old endure pain most adults couldn't survive. Ethan appeared more often now, no longer just standing in the doorway but stepping fully into the room, sitting in the chair beside Stella's crib, and sometimes, when he thought Cassie wasn't watching, he would place his large scarred hand on Stella's chest, feeling the tiny heartbeat beneath his palm, as if he needed proof his daughter was still alive. Then the 3rd week arrived, and the first miracle happened. Cassie was feeding Stella as usual, the baby's tiny hand resting limp on her thigh like it had for weeks, when she felt something, a movement, light as a butterfly, so weak it could have been imagined, but it was real. Stella's finger was moving, trying to curl around Cassie's finger. She called Dr. Wells immediately, and he confirmed that Stella's motor nervous system was beginning to recover, that her muscles were slowly regaining strength after months of paralysis from muscle relaxants. In the 4th week, Stella began to move her legs, first small twitches, then weak kicks against the blanket, then purposeful movements as she reached for toys Cassie hung above the crib. Ethan flooded the room with toys from FAO Schwartz, soft stuffed bears, gentle rattles, fabric books bursting with color, until Cassie had to remind him Stella only had 2 hands and couldn't play with everything at once. In the 5th week, Stella laughed, not the thin kitten-like cry Cassie had grown used to, but a real laugh, the laugh of a baby being tickled with bubbles blown on her belly. a sound clear as chimes that made the entire room feel brighter. Cassie cried when she heard it. Cried from happiness, from relief, because she finally knew Stella would be all right. Ethan was standing in the doorway when it happened, and Cassie could have sworn she saw his gray-blue eyes glisten under the light before he turned away. Then the 6th week came, and Stella spoke her first word. Not Papa like most children. Not Mama, though Diana was long gone. But a halting, trembling sound formed by tiny lips, struggling to command muscles that had only just learned to move again. Kaka. Cassie froze, not daring to believe her ears. Stella tried again, clearer this time, gray-blue eyes shining with the pride of a child who'd done something extraordinary. Kaka. Cassie pulled Stella into her arms and sobbed, tears soaking into the baby's soft, sparse hair, unaware that Ethan was standing just behind her, witnessing the entire moment. Watching the woman who had saved his daughter cry with joy at being named by the child she loved like her own. In that moment, something shifted inside Ethan Caruso's heart. Something he couldn't yet name. But he knew it was there, and he knew it would change everything. The weeks that followed settled into a strange rhythm Cassie didn't know what to call. During the day, she cared for Stella, feeding her, bathing her, playing with her, doing physical therapy to rebuild her muscles, reading books aloud even though the baby didn't understand a single word. At night she kept watch, because although Stella had recovered a great deal, the nightmares still came, moments when the baby jolted awake with panicked cries, as if reliving the months she'd spent trapped inside her own motionless body. And every night, no matter how late it was, Ethan Caruso stopped at Stella's door. Sometimes it was 1 in the morning, sometimes 3, sometimes just as dawn crept over the horizon of Long Island Sound. But he was always there, standing in the hallway shadows, looking into the room where his daughter slept, and the woman who had saved her stood guard. Cassie knew he was there. She could feel his presence even without looking, a distinct energy, heavy and dangerous yet strangely reassuring. She never said anything, and neither did he, the two of them existing in a deliberate silence as if avoiding something they both knew but neither dared name. Ethan Caruso was a mafia boss, a killer. A man whose name made even the FBI whisper. Cassie Reyes was just a girl from the Bronx, raising her sister with sweat and tears, someone who didn't belong in a world of diamonds and blood. They shouldn't have had anything in common except the child sleeping in the crib between them, but fate had its own way of breaking every boundary. That night was ordinary like so many others until it suddenly wasn't. Cassie was dozing in the rocking chair beside Stella's crib when a scream tore through the darkness and snapped her awake with her heart racing. Stella was seizing, her tiny body arching like a bow, eyes rolled back, white foam bubbling at her lips. Cassie shouted for Dr. Wells while trying to keep Stella from falling out of the crib, turning the baby's head to the side so she wouldn't choke, doing everything she'd been taught during her time as a nursing assistant, but her hands were shaking too hard, and tears blurred everything. Then he was there, not standing in the doorway like every other night, but right beside her, a large hand gripping her shoulder, his low, steady voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm here. Stay calm. You're doing it right." Cassie didn't know what Ethan understood about seizures, but his presence was like a rock in a storm, something solid to cling to while the world spun. She kept holding Stella, kept her head turned, counted every second while praying to whatever God might be listening. A minute passed, stretched into a lifetime, and the seizure stopped. Stella lay limp in the crib, gasping, gray-blue eyes opening to search until they found Cassie, filled with the fear of a child who didn't understand what had just happened. Cassie pulled her into her arms, holding her so tightly she could feel the baby's erratic heartbeat against her own. And she cried, from terror, from relief, because she'd thought she was about to lose this child right in front of her. Then she felt something unexpected. Arms. Ethan Caruso's arms wrapped around both her and Stella, drawing them into his broad chest, and Cassie could hear his heart pounding just as wildly as hers, could feel his body trembling despite his effort to control it, could smell whiskey and cigars and something else that was simply him, and she didn't pull away. They stood there in the dark, the three of them holding each other as if it were the most natural thing in the world, a mafia boss, and a maid, and the child who had bound them together with an invisible thread no one could cut. "Dr. Wells is on his way," Ethan said after a long moment, his voice rougher than usual. "I called him. You did well, Cassandra. You saved her again." Cassie looked up at him, and in the dim glow of the duck-shaped night lamp she'd bought for Stella, she saw something she'd never seen on his face before. Real fear. the fear of a father who'd almost lost his child, and she realized that no matter who Ethan Caruso was, or what he'd done, he was still a father, still capable of love and of terror at losing it like anyone else. She didn't speak. She just rested her head against his chest and kept holding Stella. And Ethan didn't let go, the two of them standing in silence until Dr. Wells arrived, and broke a moment they both knew would change everything between them forever. 4 months passed since the night of the seizure. 4 months of peace that Cassie should have known was too perfect to last. Stella was now 14 months old, finding her balance on wobbly legs, pulling herself up on the crib rails, saying "Kaka" and "Papa" and more whenever she wanted another bite. A healthy, happy child as if the dark months had never existed. Maya had undergone a successful bone marrow transplant and was recovering at Memorial Sloan Kettering, video calling Cassie every day with a radiant smile and promises of returning to medical school the following fall. Everything was going so well. Cassie forgot she was living in a world of shadows, where happiness was a luxury paid for in blood. The DeLuca family from Chicago had been watching the Caruso empire for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and they found it on an ordinary afternoon when Cassie took Stella to a routine pediatric appointment. Frank Morano, Ethan's loyal driver who'd served the Caruso family for 20 years, was the only one with them that day because Rico was handling business in Queens. Cassie felt no suspicion when the black SUV blocked their path at the clinic exit, had no time to react when the doors flew open and dark figures rushed in. Frank managed to draw his gun and drop one man before 2 bullets tore through his shoulder and side, blood spraying across the cream leather seats of the Escalade as he collapsed, his body partially shielded by the armored door, still trying to look at Cassie as if apologizing for failing to protect her. Cassie screamed, shielding Stella, but a punch to her face sent her crashing down, and the last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her was Stella's face screaming her name. When Cassie woke, she was lying on the freezing concrete floor of an abandoned warehouse, hands bound behind her with plastic ties cinched so tight her wrists were numb. Stella lay beside her, her cry hoarse and broken, and Cassie rolled to cover the baby with her body, shielding her from the eyes of 4 men standing around them with guns and the smiles of people who knew they held all the leverage. "Call Caruso," one of them said in a thick Chicago accent. "Tell him if he wants to see his daughter and his whore alive. He has 24 hours to hand over all Southern territory to the DeLuca family." Cassie didn't know what happened outside the warehouse during those 24 hours, but she knew what happened inside. They didn't touch Stella because they knew a single scratch on Caruso's daughter would mean a slow and agonizing death for them, but Cassie didn't have that protection. Every time Stella cried too loudly, every time Cassie looked at them with too much defiance, she took another punch, another kick, another insult. Her face swelled, her lips split and bled. Several ribs were probably broken judging by the searing pain with every breath. But she never let go of Stella, never allowed the baby to leave her arms for even a second. She sang to Stella in a voice rough with thirst, rocked her to sleep in hell itself, and whispered promises that Ethan would come, that he'd find them, that everything would be all right, even though she didn't know if that was true. Elsewhere in the city, in the basement of the Obsidian nightclub, Ethan Caruso was proving why people called him a monster. The first DeLuca man captured lasted 30 minutes before giving up the Newark warehouse location after Ethan personally used pliers to pull out each fingernail. The second lasted less, 15 minutes, after witnessing what happened to his partner. Ethan didn't shout, didn't scream, didn't lose control like amateurs. He worked in silence, with the focus and precision of a surgeon. Except his tools weren't scalpels, but knives and pliers, and worse things Cassie would never need to know about. Blood coated his hands, splattered across his $3,000 white shirt. But he didn't care because his gray-blue eyes saw only one thing. Stella's face, Cassie's face, the only 2 people left in this world he cared about, in enemy hands. When he had enough information, Ethan stood, wiped his hands on the white cloth Rico offered, and said with a calm that was chilling, "Gather, everyone. We're going to Newark." The warehouse sat on the edge of Newark's abandoned industrial zone, a 3-story red brick building with shattered windows and weeds forcing their way through cracks in the concrete. The perfect place to hide people, because no one ever looked this way except rats and those who worked in the dark. 15 men from the DeLuca family were guarding the inside. Confident the location was secret enough that Caruso would never find it, confident that 24 hours would be enough to force the East Coast boss to his knees. They were wrong. Ethan arrived with his army at 3 in the morning, 20 men armed to the teeth, moving through the darkness like lethal ghosts. There were no warnings, no negotiations, no words spoken. The headlights of 7 black SUVs flared on at once, blinding like suns in the night. And before the DeLuca men could understand what was happening, gunfire tore the darkness apart. Ethan led from the front, not hiding behind his soldiers like a typical boss, but walking straight into the hail of bullets with a Glock 17 in his right hand and a backup weapon in his left. He fired with the cold precision of a man who had trained for thousands of hours. Every shot a life, not a single round wasted. One DeLuca man lunged from behind a shipping container with a shotgun, and Ethan put a bullet through his head before he could pull the trigger. Another tried to run for the back exit, and Rico chased him down and finished him with a shot to the back of the neck. 12 minutes. That was all it took to turn 15 guards into 15 corpses, scattered across blood-soaked concrete. Ethan didn't stop to check them, didn't stop to breathe. He moved straight toward the final room of the warehouse where he knew Cassie and Stella were being held. He kicked in the rusted metal door and froze. Cassie was curled in the corner, her back against the wall, arms still locked around Stella even though her wrists were bound, dried blood streaking a face so swollen it was almost unrecognizable. Her left eye was bruised shut, her lips split with a deep cut still seeping blood, and even in the dim light Ethan could see the bruises on her neck and arms, the marks of fists and rough hands. But what crushed his heart wasn't the injuries. It was how Cassie reacted when the door flew open. She didn't look up, didn't cry for help, didn't do anything except clutch Stella tighter and angle her body to shield the baby with what remained of herself, ready to take more blows to protect a child who wasn't her own. "Cassandra," Ethan said, his voice breaking on the final syllable, and for the first time in 20 years of ruling, the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast heard his own voice shake. Cassie looked up, the one eye she could still open, blinking in the flashlight beam, and it took several seconds for her to recognize the man standing there. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice raw from thirst and screaming. And then she cried, tears rolling down swollen cheeks, mixing with dried blood in painful red trails. You came. Ethan moved forward, dropped to his knees beside her, and used the dagger still slick with enemy blood to cut the ties at her wrists, with a gentleness no one would have believed he possessed. Stella looked up at him with gray-blue eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling, and the baby said one word in a hoarse voice worn raw from crying too much. "Papa." Ethan gathered both of them into his arms, his large frame wrapping around Cassie and Stella, pulling them into his chest as if he feared they would vanish if he let go. He didn't speak, not a single word. He just held them, and Cassie could feel his body trembling, could feel his heart hammering against her ear, could smell gunpowder and blood on his clothes, but she wasn't afraid or repulsed. She felt safe for the first time after 24 hours of hell. They stayed that way for a minute, maybe 2, maybe a lifetime. Cassie didn't know and didn't care. She only knew Ethan had come, that he had found them, that he had killed everyone who had hurt them and would kill anyone who dared touch them in the future. And in that moment, held in the arms of the most dangerous killer in America, Cassie Reyes accepted a truth she had tried to deny for months. She loved him. She loved Ethan Caruso for everything he was, everything he had done, everything he would do. She loved him not because he was rich or powerful, but because he had run through gunfire to find her, because he was shaking as he held her like she was the most precious thing he had ever known, because in those cold, gray-blue eyes there were tears now, tears he would never admit to, but Cassie could feel them falling into her hair. Rico appeared in the doorway, took in the scene, and silently turned away, signaling the others to stay out. And in the warehouse filled with corpses and the stench of blood, amid the wreckage of violence and hatred, 3 people clung to one another, as if it were the only thing left in the world that mattered. That night, Cassie couldn't sleep. Dr. Wells had examined and bandaged her injuries, confirmed that 2 ribs were cracked, and the countless bruises would take weeks to fade. But nothing was life-threatening. Stella slept soundly in her crib after a warm bath and a full feeding, gray-blue eyes closed in the peaceful trust of a child who knew she was safe. But Cassie couldn't close her own eyes, because every time she tried, the darkness of the warehouse crashed back in. The DeLuca men's laughter echoed in her head. The memory of fists slamming into her body replayed on her skin even though the wounds were wrapped. At 2 in the morning she slipped out of bed, pulled on the silk robe someone had left in her closet, and stepped barefoot into the hallway, the Persian carpet soft beneath her feet. She didn't know where she was going until she stopped in front of Ethan's door, and even then she didn't know what she would say if he opened it. She knocked softly, once, twice, and the door opened almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting, as if he hadn't slept either. Ethan stood there in an open white dress shirt and black slacks, his hair slightly rumpled like he'd run his hand through it again and again, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and gray-blue eyes fixed on her with something she couldn't name. "I can't sleep," Cassie said, hating the tremor in her voice. "Neither can I," Ethan replied, then stepped aside to let her in. His bedroom was larger than her old Bronx apartment, with a king-size bed dressed in black silk sheets, a fire crackling in the hearth, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Long Island Sound, glittering under the moon. She stood in the middle of the room, unsure where to sit or what to do, feeling out of place amid a luxury she still hadn't grown used to despite months here. Ethan poured her a whiskey and handed it to her without asking, and Cassie took a large sip, the burn down her throat steadying the shaking inside her. "I should be afraid of you," Cassie said, staring into the glass instead of his eyes. "I saw what you did yesterday. I saw the blood on your hands, on your clothes. I know how many people you killed to find me and Stella. And I'm not afraid. That scares me." Ethan set his glass down and stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the heat of him, close enough to smell expensive soap and something unmistakably him beneath it. "I'll kill anyone who touches you or Stella," he said, his voice low and unyielding, like a vow. "Anyone, anytime, without hesitation. That's who I am. I won't apologize for it." Cassie looked up at him, into those gray-blue eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath, and she said the thing she'd been hiding for months. "I don't want you to apologize. I don't want you to change. I just want," she faltered, searching for words. "Want what?" Ethan asked, his voice rough. "You," Cassie whispered. "I want you." The space between them vanished in a heartbeat. Ethan cupped her cheek, so gently it was almost a ghost of a touch, like he was afraid to hurt the bruises on her face. And when he leaned down and kissed her, Cassie felt the world stop. The kiss wasn't rushed or brutal like she'd imagined a mafia boss's kiss might be. It was slow, careful, restrained, like Ethan was holding himself back with everything he had so he wouldn't break something precious. His lips were warm and tasted of whiskey, and when his hand settled on her waist and pulled her closer, Cassie felt herself melt into him, like she'd finally found where she belonged after 27 years of drifting. "You don't belong in my world," Ethan murmured when they parted to breathe, his forehead resting against hers, his breath hot on her lips. "You're too good for it, Cassandra." "Maybe," Cassie said, laying her hand over his chest, feeling his heart pounding hard beneath the fabric. "But I belong with you, and Stella belongs to both of us. That's the only world I care about." Ethan kissed her again, deeper this time, and Cassie slid her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, forgetting the ache in her ribs, forgetting the bruises, forgetting everything except his mouth on hers, his hand on her waist, his heartbeat matching her own. Then Cassie's phone vibrated, shattering the moment. She almost ignored it, but when she saw the name, her heart skipped. "Maya," she answered with shaking hands, bracing for the worst. But her sister's voice came through weak but radiant with joy. "Cassie." The test results came back. "The doctor says the transplant was completely successful. The new marrow is producing healthy blood cells. I'm going to live. I'm going to live," Cassie cried, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks, and Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind, letting her lean into his chest as she talked to Maya, as she laughed and cried at the same time, as she thanked every god she could think of for this night, the night she'd found love and learned her sister wasn't going to die. "Everything's going to be okay," Ethan whispered into her ear when she ended the call. "I promise you, Cassandra, everything's going to be okay." And for the first time in years, Cassie believed someone's promise. 1 year later, Cassandra Reyes became Cassandra Caruso in a private wedding ceremony held in the back garden of the estate, beneath the cherry tree Diana had planted before she died. Only their closest loved ones were present, Maya healthy and radiant as the maid of honor, Frank Morano recovered from his gunshot wound, and given the honor of walking Cassie down the aisle in place of the father she never had. Stella, now nearly 2 years old, toddled along the white flower-covered aisle in a tiny princess dress, clutching a basket of rose petals that she scattered everywhere except where she was supposed to, her clear laughter the most beautiful music Cassie had ever heard. Ethan stood at the end of the path in a black suit, gray-blue eyes never leaving Cassie for a single second as she walked toward him, and when they exchanged rings, when they vowed to love each other in sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty, until death parted them. Cassie knew she'd found the family she'd lost at the age of 12. 6 months after the wedding, Cassie shared an idea with Ethan, one that had taken root in her mind since the day she opened the forbidden door and discovered Stella was being poisoned. "How many children like Stella are out there?" she asked one late night, when neither of them could sleep. "How many babies are being abused, neglected, poisoned by the very people who are supposed to protect them, inside wealthy, powerful families, where no one dares to look, no one dares to ask, no one dares to open the forbidden door?" And the Diana Caruso Foundation was born, named after Ethan's late wife so her legacy could live on. The foundation provided free training for housekeepers, nannies, drivers, people who worked inside gated homes, teaching them how to recognize signs of child abuse, and offering an anonymous hotline so they could report without fear of retaliation. Ethan invested $10 million initially and raised additional funds from legitimate business tycoons he knew, men willing to contribute once they understood where their money would go. In the first year, the foundation saved 43 children and trained 500 workers. In the second year, the numbers doubled. In the third year, 3 other states adopted their model. 15 years later, when Stella was 16 and preparing for college, the Diana Caruso Foundation had become a national organization with offices in 12 cities, had saved more than 2,000 children, and trained more than 20,000 workers. Cassie, now 42 years old, stood on the balcony of the estate looking down at the garden where her 3 children played in the late afternoon sun. Stella, tall and beautiful, with black hair and gray-blue eyes like her father's, sat reading a law book beneath the cherry tree, while her younger siblings, an 8-year-old boy named Daniel after Cassie's father, and a 5-year-old girl named Diana, after Stella's mother, chased each other across the lawn. Ethan stepped out beside her, more silver at his temples now, but the same sharp eyes, his arm wrapping around his wife's waist, as it had every day for 15 years. "She just told me she wants to study law," Ethan said, watching Stella. "She wants to specialize in child protection, work for the foundation after she graduates, use the law to put child abusers in prison." Cassie smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "I know, Stella already told me. She said Mama Cassie saved me when I was a baby, and now I want to save other children." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then asked the question he'd asked many times over the years, and every time Cassie answered with the same certainty. "Do you regret it, opening that door?" Cassie turned to look at her husband, into the eyes of the man she'd loved for 15 years, the man who gave her a family, a purpose, a chance to change the world in her own small way. "It was the best decision of my life," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "I found Stella. I found you. I found the meaning of my life, and it all started with opening a door someone told me I shouldn't open." Ethan kissed her forehead, and they stood there in silence, watching their children play, watching their legacy grow and shine in the sunlight. Cassie and Ethan's story isn't a perfect fairy tale. It has blood, tears, sleepless nights, and scars that never fully heal. But it also has love, hope, and the courage of a poor housekeeper from the Bronx who dared to stand against the world to protect a child who wasn't her own. And that's what all of us can learn from this story. That sometimes changing a life takes only a small act. A door opened, a voice raised, a hand offered when someone needs help. You don't need to be rich. You don't need to be powerful. You don't need anything except eyes that are willing to see, a heart that's willing to feel, and the courage to act when everyone else chooses to look away. If this story touched your heart, if you laughed and cried with Cassie, Stella, and Ethan on their journey, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more moving stories like this. Please like and share this video with the people you love so the message of courage and compassion can reach even more hearts. We want to hear from you. What did this story make you feel? Did it make you think about your own life? Have you ever stood before a forbidden door and had to choose between safety and conscience? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts from the depths of your heart, because every story matters, and we truly want to listen. Thank you for staying with us until the end of today's story. We wish you and your loved ones good health, joyful lives, and days filled with peace and happiness. Remember that you have the power to change the world, as long as you're brave enough to open the doors others tell you not to open. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.